Hello, America, and welcome to our Wednesday night special. Tonight, from my art studio at my house, we are still under quarantine because we could all die, you know. Although I'm beginning to think that something else is being killed, and that is the American way of life. And I'm not just talking about the economy. I'm talking about our understanding of what makes America, America, what makes us free, what gives us pride, what gives us meaning in our life. I want to show you some stats. This is from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, published 4/24, looking at January through April. So know that it's got January, February, March in there, which were pretty good months. But here we go. Job losses by sector. In restaurants and bars, 12.3 million. Travel and transportation, 3.5. Entertainment, 2.7. Personal services, 2.1. Retail, 6.6 million jobs lost. Manufacturing, 3.5 million. Construction, 1.1. In total, 34 million jobs have been lost. If you look at the map there that you will see on your screen, the darkest color for the states means that the unemployment is estimated now to be at 23% or higher. The height of the Great Depression was 25%. The next shade down is 20 to 23%. The next shade down, lighter, is 18 to 20%. And if you have a light blue, you're in a state that only has unemployment at 18% or lower. If you look at the number of people that have been furloughed or out of work, it is staggering by percentage. Hospitality, 51%, and entertainment. Restaurant dining, 46%. Retail, 38%. Manufacturing, 18%. Agriculture, 12%. Office administration, 10%. I mean, it's a bloodbath. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce now estimates there's nearly 10 million U.S. small businesses that are closed because of COVID-19. Half of U.S. households have at least one member who is out of work or lost a job because of COVID-19. Americans making less than $50,000 a year are the hardest hit, with over 60% of those people losing wages or jobs, compared to 40% of those who are making above $50,000 a year. Among non-homeowners, more than 40% report that they could not pay the rent in April. We're now facing May rent. The unofficial unemployment based on filings for benefits estimated now to come in at 13.5% for April. However, if you measure through shadow stats, if you measure it the way we measured it before we started playing with the unemployment number, if we measure it like it was in the Great Depression, using those measurements, which measured unemployment in the Great Depression at 25%, the estimated unemployment unofficially through shadow stats is 27.2%. 13 million people who have attempted to apply for unemployment last month were unsuccessful. They're still waiting to get through to the unemployment office to be able to get a check. This is a disaster, an absolute disaster. And then when you watch TV, you see the politicians, and the politicians are saying things like this. Watch this from Governor Cuomo.
Is there a fundamental right to work if the government can't get me the money when I need it? Is there a fundamental right
you want to go to work? Go take a job as an essential worker. Do it tomorrow. Right? You're working.
I am.
You're an essential worker. So go take a job as an essential worker.
But the people aren't hiring because of the...
No, there are people hiring. You can get a job as an essential worker. So now you can go to work and you can be an essential worker and you're not going to kill anyone.
Arrogance here of not actually hearing the voices of the people who are actually struggling. They can't get through to the unemployment line. They need cash now. When he was asked about Well, we haven't fixed the unemployment office yet. We have millions of people that can't get through. He said, don't worry about it. You'll get your money. You won't lose a dime. Yes, but I need to feed my family right now. The deaf ears are staggering. I want to show you something. This is a New York City tailor who has defied the New York state order. Now, he is in New York City. In fact, he's the guy, I used to live by this little shop. It's a little teeny one-store kind of place owned by one guy. I bought my son's first suit at this store. He is now having to open, and he has to open and defy all the orders because he can't make it. And he's tried to do everything the right way. Watch this.
We have tried city government, state government, United States government. We've applied for every loan, every break, every pay thing to no avail. They have acknowledged receiving our applications, which we completed within the first 24 hours, and have not heard anything since. As a result, I am opening my store to my customers to provide emotional, essential support. All of you guys stay vertical, stay healthy, all the best.
Now, is he a lawbreaker? Meanwhile, the politicians, Nancy Pelosi, delays, while spending time on nighttime television, and almost like Marie Antoinette, says this.
And this is something you can get through the mail.
Okay.
Run out. Now show
me.
you?
Yeah, absolutely. This is the episode of Cribs I never knew I needed. Oh my, wow.
Other people in our family look for some other flavors, but chocolate, and then we have some other chocolate here.
I've always felt a connection with you, and now I understand why.
We just got it restocked with the ice cream for Easter Sunday because we were, shall we say, enjoying. I don't know what I would have done if ice cream were not invented.
This is unbelievable. Notice she didn't say we ran out to the store. She said we just had it restocked. That's like, I don't even know, $100 worth of ice cream, and she's stalling to get money to the average person. Well, what would you expect? The person that party is running, I don't even know if he knows what's going on. Listen to him talk about the economy this week.
I would get much more engaged in the world. We can't step back. If, in fact, for example, we solve the problem in the United States of America and you don't solve it in other parts of the world, you know what's going to happen. You're going to have travel bans. You're going to not be able to have economic intercourse around the world. There's a lot. Look, when America goes alone, when America is first, it's America alone.
Believe me, the people in Washington have been having economic intercourse with the people of the world in America for a long time. We keep getting screwed. We know it. We don't like it. The federal debt is up this month. In the last 30 days, we have spent $1 trillion to print that money. If we would have had to actually print it and not digitize, the money that we have put out in the last 4 weeks would take us over a year to physically print. We've already spent it. And yet there are people at the bottom of the ladder, unlike the banks, they don't have anything. And we're being told now that Congress can't go to work because it's too dangerous. Are they not essential workers? We thought that for all of the people that are feeling the crunch and feeling alone, we needed to find somebody that could speak and speak with some authority on essential work and the meaning of work and some of the crazy stuff that is going on. We decided to go for a guy who has actually caused a lot of problems. He's actually dangerous. This is at least according to a left-wing source. We are concerned. I'm concerned that the medicine we're prescribing might turn out to be more deadly than the virus we're trying to kill, our guest said, leaning on the catchphrase "safety third" from a previous hour-long special he hosted. He decried the unintended consequences of ranking safety above everything else. I think some other crazy man did that, called Benjamin Franklin. He said it's precisely what our leaders are doing right now. He asked his fans to imagine if society treated automobile deaths with the same frenzied up-to-the-minute drama as each new virus infection. Would any of us drive again? His comments, those comments, were called irresponsible, that fit with the Fox News pattern of pushing medical misinformation, downplaying the virus, and giving a platform to conspiracy theories and engaging in racist fear-mongering. Welcome to the program, Mr. Mike Rowe.
That's awesome. Thank you, Glenn. It's great to see you. I'm just sitting here, hunkered in my bunker, enjoying vast quantities of ice cream and reveling in the delights of economic intercourse.
Yeah. So, Mike, you've been watching all of this. Let me just start with some basic things. I think at first, we didn't know what we were dealing with, and we wanted to make sure that we didn't wipe out, millions and millions of people. But as the numbers started rolling in, we see that it's not millions and millions of people. It's not as deadly as we first thought. And yet it's almost as if the media it does not want us to go back to work. Does that seem right to you?
Well, your analysis seems right. The underlying thinking seems deeply and profoundly flawed. But, those comments and the people I upset with some of my early observations when all of this started to spool out really all came. I've been saying this since 2008. I hosted a special for the Discovery Channel years ago called Safety Third, which was a rumination on what I believe is one of the most pernicious platitudes and bromides to ever really take hold, which of course is safety first. A well-intended attempt to keep people mindful of the importance of being safe on the job. But of course, it's not really true, and when companies tell us that their top priority is our safety, well, that's not true. And I don't care if it's American Airlines or United Airlines. When you start to believe that somebody cares more about your well-being than you do, that opens the door to complacency. So from a vocational point of view, I always took issue with safety first. And on dirty jobs, my crew and I always said safety third, just to remind us that in the end, there was a measure of personal responsibility involved in coming home in one piece. Now, what's happening?
So wait, what is first and second?
It's actually irrelevant. It's up to you to decide.
Okay.
But the point of saying safety third is that safety is too important to prioritize. It's really safety always. It's not a thing you rank. But if you were to rank it, I would put it somewhere behind the business of getting the job done and getting paid fairly for doing the job.
So you are somebody that would have been fine with the White Star Line because they put safety third, right? They decided they needed to get that ship going, and so they didn't have enough lifeboats, Mike.
Well, it's not about whether I'm fine with it or not. It's the reality of the way the world works. And the reality of driving and flying and working on the job requires us all to assume a certain amount of risk. Now, it's well and good to eliminate as much of that risk as possible. I'm all for it. Where my back goes up is when people who run companies tell me that their reason for existing is to keep me safe. That's not true. And when Andrew Cuomo, with respect, says that no measure, no matter how drastic or draconian, could be deemed unjustified if it saves a single life, well, that's not true either. So, look,
I just said recently that there is no natural right. Forget about the Bill of Rights. There is no natural right to safety because the world is naturally unsafe. So even God doesn't promise you safety. And when you lose perspective and you do put, as you put, safety first instead of safety third, you are now doing something that is absolutely impossible. And you have to violate. Oh, I could keep my children perfectly safe from many things, but I'd have to lock them in the room. That violates all natural rights to be able to give them something that is an unnatural right.
Of course. I mean, if he was serious and if he truly believed that saving lives was the primary thing, well, then cut the speed limit down to 20 miles an hour. Yep. Insist that all motorists, passengers included, wear helmets and outlaw left turns. You'll save 40,000 lives a year. This is
so let me take a quick break here, Mike, and I want to come back there because you should be burned at the stake. It feels like now if you just say, wait a minute, there's a balance to everything. There is a concern for people's safety, but we have to balance that with the economy. If we kill the economy, millions around the world will die. What America and the free market has brought to the world is life, not death, life. And if you kill that, but nobody wants to talk about that balance, so we'll do that here in a second. First, let me just stop real quick and tell you about Rough Greens. Dry dog food has to live 2 or 3 years on the shelf. Now, I want you to know, Rough Greens, they're in business because they want to keep your dog safe first. Nah. They like dogs. All this stuff was designed by vets, so it's really good. A doctor was even involved in this one. But I think they're in it to help dogs and make money. But what do I know? Your dog, if it's like mine, will change. This is not a dog food. This is a supplement that you put on, and it has all of the probiotics and all the crap my wife makes me eat because I need it. Well, so does your dog. And they don't get it from their food because everything's been sterilized and cooked out and burned out, all the good stuff. As the parent of a dog myself, I will tell you that Uno, my dog, has completely changed. I was petting him the other day, and his coat, he's never been so soft. It's Rough Greens by VitaSmart. It's a supplement that you put into your dog's food. I want you to go to Rough Greens, ruffgreens.com/Glenn, and just try it. 14-day, take the trial on this. 14 days, $14.95. See the difference in your dog in 2 weeks or less. Your dog will thrive. It's ruffgreens.com/Beck. That's ruffgreens.com/Beck. So, Mike, let's pick it up with common sense, because common sense seems to be the victim of authoritative truth, as the people in social media are calling it. You're not authoritative truth. I'm not authoritative truth. But doctors, if they're on the same page with everybody else, and CNN, ABC, that's authoritative truth. What happened to trust the American people to figure it out?
We fell in love with credentialing. We lost healthy skepticism. We replaced it with cynicism. And most perniciously, I think, we started to accept cookie cutter advice. Cookie cutter advice is almost never, ever, ever, ever good. It's what politicians dispense when they try to get elected. And it's what salesmen embrace when they try to sell the most that they can. When we told an entire generation, for instance, that the best path for the most people was a college degree, that was cookie cutter advice. And the unintended consequences of dispensing that advice include $1.6 trillion in student loans and a skills gap that makes absolutely no sense, at least retrospectively. I think the answer to your question has to do with reasonableness. You know, it's not unreasonable for a person to look at two conflicting experts and conclude that one of them is going to be incorrect, you know, and it's logical to turn to the experts in times of great confusion, but it's not unreasonable for a common person to say, look, this guy says 2.2 million dead. This guy says 60,000 dead. One of them is working off reliable data. One of them's not. One of them is going to be correct. One of them isn't.
And even if it was the correct assumption at the beginning, when you have no data or very little data, it's fine if you say, okay, the guy at 2.2 was mistaken, but now let's look at it and readjust because we have new information. It's almost as if there is no new information. We're dealing with something brand new, and yet it seems as though we're not supposed to adjust as we go along.
Well, it's tribal. You know, we're trapped in a prison of two ideas. And as a result, it's very difficult for us to say anything that applies to everyone. And yet we can't help it. We're so desperate to latch on to a platitude like safety first, right? And to say that in a way that is so completely all-encompassing. But it's not, nor is it unreasonable for a person to step back and say, why did we treat Newark in Manhattan exactly like Bismarck and Akron?
Mm-hmm.
Why are we so convinced that the best path for everyone is identical? Now, I know what the answers to that question are, but posing the question and looking at it through the lens of modeling and statistics is not an unreasonable thing to do. And yet, if you dare to do it, to your point, you'll be immediately put on one side or the other, and you'll be dismissed by half the country and lionized by the other half. And so it goes. You know, it is the prison of two ideas.
So what happens to us? I was just talking to Dave Rubin the other day, and he said, you know, I think, Glenn, that there's a renewal that is happening of independent thought and libertarian ideas, et cetera, et cetera. At the same time, you look what's happening around the country, and it's insane how we have lost. I mean, when Cuomo says to people, look, you're going to get your money, and he can't relate to somebody who is living literally paycheck to paycheck and cannot afford anything and has bill collectors pounding at his door at night, and says, you're breaking the law if you go out and try to work someplace. If you open up your store or you go to work, you're breaking the law, without any understanding or compassion. And others like Ocasio-Cortez that says, and we'll get into this a little bit later, that says, you know, this isn't freedom to go to work. They completely miss the dignity of work, the importance of work, and the importance of the individual being able, the pursuit of happiness. Which side is winning here, Mike? Where are the American people?
Sometimes things have to go splat, right, before there's a reckoning. I mean, not sometimes, all of the time, especially when you're talking about issues this big. We can't pivot fast enough to get our heads around the data, never mind getting our heads around the sociological and existential shifts that are happening all around us. I said this very early in the process. Somebody asked me, you know, is there a way to sum up? And of course, that's the thing I'm most suspicious of, summing up. Mm-hmm. It's very hard. But what I said was, it's a bit like watching the country go through the Kubler-Ross 5 stages of grief at different times. This one's in denial. That one's angry. That one's depressed. That one's bargaining. Over there, he's accepted. Well, what has he accepted? You know? And so everybody is running a different race at a different speed, trying to navigate with an ever-changing set of rules. Because of that, we should be more forgiving and more accepting and more open to the likelihood that we are dead wrong than ever. Instead, we dig in and we hang on and we collect our sources and we say the evidence demands a verdict and we point to the evidence, right? And now we're all prosecuting our own individual cases. That's a long way of saying, I think Dave Rubin's right. I think most of the country is going to come through this with the realization that we're being treated like children and we're being fed platitudes, bromides, and bowls of warm milk by people who want us to look at them as parents. And when that lands, things will change.
This kind of happened after World War I with Woodrow Wilson. I mean, he started talking about, the League of Nations and how we were supposed to, all kind of fall in together, and the American people wanted nothing to do with it. And he started traveling the country saying, well, I just haven't explained it well enough. But the American people knew, and they were like, no, we got it. We just don't want it. You have from today's news, the Secretary General said that we need to use the coronavirus pandemic to rebuild our world for the better. Okay. I'm not sure that we all agree on what is better. This is like the Fabian socialist window. Let us remold the world closer to our heart's desire. They keep talking about going back to a new normal. No, what exactly is the new normal? What's happening?
Well, in the spirit of war analogies, I'll submit the Second World War, 1939. The Germans are bombing Britain like nobody's ever bombed anything before. And it's so horrible that the people do the only thing they can do. They go underground and they wait and they hunker down for a week and then 2 weeks. And then an interesting thing happened. The bombs are still falling, but the people start to come out. And then they open shops. Bombs are still falling. And then they open schools. The bombs are still falling. And after 6 weeks of daily bombing, the British people basically got bored of being terrified. And so they simply realized that they were out of balance. There are times, Glenn, in my view, where safety first is wise and prudent. You don't drive 55 when there's an ice storm. You adjust, you recalibrate, and you take the temperature of the room and you adjust your behavior. It's called homeostatic risk equilibrium. We're all hardwired to adapt and adjust our behavior to the circumstances around us. And there are times when putting safety above all things makes absolute sense. But there has never been a time where arbitraging everything else out of the equation and venerating safety to the point that nothing else is even allowed to be discussed. There's never been a point in our history, at least as I understand it, where that's made a lick of sense.
It's really interesting because I just did a painting, and as you can see it behind me, it's of Winston Churchill with "Keep calm and carry on," and he's wearing a mask. And I painted that during this virus because I thought that's what Churchill would do. If he had to wear a mask, he'd wear a mask, but he'd still say, keep calm and carry on. Get out, do what you're supposed to do, get the job done. We adjust and we keep calm and keep moving. That is the exact opposite of what is happening now. Back in just a second with more with Mike Rowe.
Only in America does the president, when the president tweets about liberation, does he mean go back to work? When we have this discussion about going back or reopening, I think a lot of people should just say, no, we're not going back to that. We're not going back to working 70-hour weeks just so that we could put food on the table and not even feel any sort of semblance of security in our lives.
Mike, I don't even think I have to ask you a question. I just need to say this. Response?
Well, I mean, what can you say, Glenn? It's a view of work that I don't share. It's a view of work that I don't understand. It's a view of work that is rooted in the belief that the effort itself is the enemy of happiness. It takes work and turns it into nothing but a presupposed definition of drudgery. And look, she can set her table any way that she wants. But if that's really how she views work, then we've just had very different experiences. I keep a poster behind me from Dirty Jobs. 15 years ago, I put a pig I put a pig on a pedestal to, launch that show and try and make the point that whatever you put on your own pedestal is going to be your North Star. It's going to be the thing that informs how you think and how you act. And so I wanted to celebrate farmers. I wanted to celebrate people that were typically invisible, essential workers, which are now very much in the news. And that's why I did that show. And that's why I continue to work on similar programs. But when I look at what she just said and compare it to the people that I've met on my show, it's Mars and Venus. It's just a completely different view of the world.
And let me ask you something, Mike, that I think you're qualified to answer, maybe uniquely qualified to answer. I get a lot of satisfaction out of what I do, a lot of frustration as well. But I come home generally satisfied. It gives me purpose. It gives me meaning. But when I do physical labor, there is something that changes in me. By the end of the day, I'm dog tired, but there is a sense of a different kind of accomplishment. Now, that may be just because I do physical labor so rarely. I don't know. But is there something to physical labor as opposed to just mental labor?
I think so. I think I remember a psychologist years ago, I think his name was Ekman, maybe Paul Ekman, who wrote a paper on the physiology of smiling. And it seemed like such a preposterous thing, but it was the idea that if you smile when you're not happy, if you smile all of the time, it does trigger something in your brain that changes your state. And I found that kind of fascinating. And it's a roundabout way of saying, yeah, physicality it absolutely informs the way we think. And people ask me all the time about dirty jobs. What did that group of people know that the rest of us have forgotten? That was part of it, the physicality of work, but also the feedback. Dirty jobbers know how they're doing. When you're putting in a fence post, as I know you've done, you don't have to look around to see what the foreman says. There's a hole. You dug it. There's the post. You put it in there. There are the rails. You hammered them. You always know how you're doing over the course of your day. A lot of people don't have that in their life. AOC's desk probably looks the same at 5 p.m. as it does at 5 a.m. She doesn't have any visual cues as to how she's doing, and most people don't. That's something that we have lost. I would also add that part of the reason you love what you do, and I've said this to you before, I think you approach your work as a broadcaster with the mindset of a tradesman. You have a beginning and a middle and an end. Your thoughts have beginnings and middles and ends. Your interviews have beginnings and middles and ends, and when you get that anybody is capable of looking at their work as a jobber or a freelancer, but for some reason we don't. Here in California, freelancing has basically been made illegal. The gig economy has been positioned as the enemy of fulfillment because people are afraid that Uber drivers might be taken advantage of, or 1099ers are
but
somehow.
Mike, isn't that the American way? That's regressive. That's not progressive thinking. That's regressive thinking. That's protecting the old and rejecting the innovation. That's what has made America and the world. That's why we've had the 5,000-year leap. We went from 5,000 years of just cooking on fire to now microwaves and space travel. It's because of the individual not being able to disrupt. Disruption is good.
I'm with you. It's not uniquely American, though. The word freelancer, do you know where it came from? Its etymology?
No.
It was literally a feudal medieval term referring to a knight who served no master. His lance was free. He ate what he killed. He went out into the world and in his own shell, in his own armor, and based on his own ability to master his chosen trade, he made his living. And that, to me, is the essence of independence and economic freedom. That's why I'm such a proponent of the skilled trades, because once you master that trade, it travels with you, assuming, of course, you're willing to travel. When we come through this, the need for skilled tradesmen will be unlike anything we've ever seen before. And I would
let me break here and come back, because that's where I want to go. What is on the horizon? What should we be focusing on? What are the jobs that are going to be needed next? And I want to spend a couple of minutes just with you on universities and getting giant bailouts. More in a second with Mike Rowe. So right now, Mike, there are people that went and signed up for the government PPP loan and got it, and then called all of their workers and said, hey, don't worry, you haven't lost your job. And many of them are angry because they were making more money from the government sitting at home. What are the incentives that people are going to need to get back to work? Or do you think they will? And what's going to change? What should we be preparing for? What's it going to look like on the other side?
Again, there's no pat answer. It really depends on who you are, how you're wired, what you're willing to do as an individual. Speaking very, very broadly, I think we're going to learn again, as we always do, that cause and effect are real, and consequences, both unintended and intended. We're going to see a lot of both. Personally, I think, and my foundation is doing everything we can to promote the mastery of skills that are actually in demand. I think in terms of silver linings, universities are being revealed to be precisely what they are, which are now dispensers of credentials. And these credentials have been weighed and measured, and they are found increasingly lacking. And we're seeing people learning in this same dynamic that you and I are talking right now. When you read about Harvard not refunding the tuition for this semester, or for that matter, the cost of room and board, the same institution with a $40 billion endowment, more and more parents, varsity blues aside, are going to start looking at new ways to learn. And I think that could be potentially really exciting. But look, over all of it, Glenn, looms this conversation of essential work. And that's what I wanted to say about AOC in the last block, and Cuomo before that. When Cuomo makes that distinction between essential and non-essential workers, it's ironic for me to make this point because I've been singing the praises of essential workers for 20 years. But in COVID and in an economy like this, when you take 26 million non-essential workers out of the equation, what happens? The whole thing collapses under its own weight. I would suggest to you right now that there is no such thing as a non-essential worker when it comes to the economy.
Agree. I mean, I find it interesting that essential work in some states is no construction unless it's a state project. You can't build anything unless it's for the state. You can't. And then at the same time, you have Congress saying it's too dangerous. They don't need to go to work, which I'm fine with. They could stay at home for the rest of their lives. I am totally fine with that. But just don't pass bills and lie to us about a quorum when there is no quorum, when there's nobody there. They're passing things that none of them have even voted on or seen, and yet they're essential but not essential enough to come back to work.
There's a corollary, I think, between essential work and elective surgery, right? So we said no elective surgery because we want to make sure we have the capacity to handle the onslaught of COVID. Well, what happens? Mayo Clinic's laying off thousands of people. Hospitals And again, this shouldn't be controversial. It's just a fact. Hospitals are in real trouble because they don't have any patients / customers.
Correct.
It's all been postponed.
Hospitals all over Texas. Texas is laying off nurses and essential medical workers all across the state because they don't have the money. Well, yes, that's because you weren't doing anything except COVID. I have a friend in Michigan who may die because his surgery was not deemed essential. He has kidney failure and cancer in the kidneys. If it spreads out of his kidneys, he can't get a transplant. He dies. If that's not essential, what is?
You're going to find, when you peel back all the layers of this onion, a giant ball of unintended consequence. And I don't know exactly how deep it goes, but it's going to be everywhere. And I think also you're going to find really surprising corollaries. I was just walking my dog this morning thinking a woman looked at, I wasn't wearing a mask, and I'm in a fairly rural area here, and she walked by and just shook her head, just gave me that look,
There you go.
It's just we can't help ourselves. This thing is falling into this tribal thing, and it's a trap. And somehow or another, forgive me as I fumble through this, I'm going to say it wrong, but there's a corollary to stop and frisk. There's a corollary to profiling. It goes back to cookie cutter approaches. And when we ask, I think there's something comforting to a lot of people in the country when we treat everybody exactly the same, even if it doesn't make a lot of sense. And maybe somewhere in that there's an interesting rumination. Maybe the grown-up in the room right now has to say, look, the situation in Michigan is different than the situation in Florida. We can't treat them identically, even if it makes us feel good to do that. There's going to be a consequence if we do. Please, I hope this doesn't come back over the net with Mike Rowe is in favor of stop and frisk or racial profiling. I'm not saying that.
Oh, it will. It absolutely will, Mike.
Every time I see you. Every time I see you. Oi.
Yeah, it absolutely will. It's the concept of e pluribus unum. We come from many places, and we're all different. But there's a few things that we are one on. But then we all break up and do our own thing. We're not all the same. We shouldn't be all the same. But just a few principles are uniting to us. We don't even understand that concept anymore. Let me give you one more thing. You've built a career on television and broadcast. I've built, on broadcast 40-some years in broadcast and television and radio. YouTube was to give the average person a voice. You know that it was really hard to break into broadcast because there were only a few outlets. And if you weren't in one of those outlets, you didn't have a voice. Now anyone can have a voice. I want to give you this from Neil Mohan. He's the chief product officer of YouTube. Yesterday, he said that YouTubers who share their opinion on the news cannot provide context, and this is why they need to be suppressed or censored. He made the comments during an interview. He said that changing guidance on masks reflects the actual underlying information is changing in a fundamental way, as opposed to, somebody espousing their opinions without a mask, in their basement. This is coming from an authoritative channel, a news source, a medical professional. And if that's the case, we think there's going to be some context that's provided around the question of masks. Even if that guidance changes, it will be reflected in sort of how an authoritative voice or channel talks about it. So what he's saying is, if you're not a selected channel by YouTube, you're in your library, I'm in my art studio. They're not basements, but what's the difference? You're not authoritative. I'm not authoritative, but CNN is. I'm concerned about the merging of social media, the government, and these giant media corporations not listening to the people at a time when anybody's voice should be heard.
from a broadcasting point of view, you and I have both lived through a seismic shift. 30 years ago, we were still in the age of authority, when our newscasters all sounded like this and looked like this and talked like this. And then we kind of morphed into what I call the age of authenticity, where on shows like Dirty Jobs and Deadliest Catch, it wasn't about being authoritative, it was about being real. Now, we're not quite sure where we are. We're stuck in a place that I would call faux certainty. And as a narrator of some experience, I talk about this a lot and I write about it. I narrate a show called How the Universe Works. Quick example. A couple years ago, I announced that the best minds in science had determined the number of galaxies in the known universe were approximately 200 million. Mind-boggling. Got nearly 1 trillion stars in every galaxy. The universe is huge. The measurements were taken, and the best minds had come to a consensus. 2 weeks later, I was asked, as I often am, to reread that passage. New science had emerged. A new way of measuring triangulation with the Hubble had allowed the best minds in science to revise that number up from 200 million to 2 trillion. Now, the point, Glenn, is that when I'm off by nearly 2 trillion as a narrator, I sound just like I do when I'm right. When I'm wrong and when I'm right, I sound like this. Well, so do our newscasters, and so do our politicians. And look, I think it was Yeats who said in The Second Coming, the best lack all conviction, and the worst are filled with passionate intensity. We are surrounded by passionate intensity. We're surrounded by certainty, and we're surrounded by experts who claim the high moral authoritative ground. And when all of that becomes in conflict with itself, it's left to reasonable, common sense Americans to choose as best they can. And that's what we're trying to do.
The only thing certain that I am certain of is that I am not certain of most things. Back in a minute. Well, hopefully the world makes a little more sense to you. Just know that you're not alone, even though you might actually physically be alone. All of your family at the Blaze is here. Thank you so much for being a member of BlazeTV. If you haven't yet, please join us, blazetv.com. And as Henry Ford said, chop your own wood. It'll warm you twice.